It is time for a fresh outlook on the most talked about topics of the week. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. I'm Toschi. We're going to take a whirl around the world in our first segment and talk about some of the unrest overseas. We'll start things off in Kiev, where the situation remains tense after more clashes between protesters and riot police. We'll also talk about the Geneva II conference and the unrest in Egypt. So a lot to talk about in our first segment. Also on today's show, we'll talk about the Obama administration's frustrating NSA week. And remember the movie Goodfellas? Well, this week the FBI arrested some reputed mobsters who added some inspiration to that movie. But first, wherever you are watching from, whether it's here in the U.S. or abroad, all eyes have been on the Ukraine. The government says peaceful negotiations have not had any results and that extremist groups are causing protests in every major city in the country despite bitter cold and snowfall. Let's take a look and talk it out.
Anti-government protesters man barricades of burning tires in the center of Kiev. As the demonstrations gather momentum, opposition leaders issue a stark ultimatum to the government. They're calling on President Viktor Yanukovych to call early elections within 24 hours.
If the president was concerned in the slightest for the well-being of Ukraine, something would have changed by now. But they are only trying to find a way to avoid all of this, like a swindler trying to fool the international community and their own people.
The demand comes as 4 protesters were killed in confrontations with police. But the president says there has to be a two-pronged approach to resolving the conflict.
The situation requires urgent resolution. First of all, we need to act within the law, and second, there is that political space, the parliament.
Some demonstrators say the ultimatum will not change the government's position.
We will need more radical actions. We have no time left to wait. Today we are completely mobilized, so I believe something will happen.
Protester numbers have swelled, pushing back hundreds of riot police. After 2 months of largely peaceful protests, many demonstrators are growing increasingly restless. In response to the growing violence, the U.S. is considering sanctions against the Ukrainian government.
And joining us now is former White House aide Dee Dee Benkie, media analyst Jackie Guzda, and Dr. Michael Mckoy from Rutgers University. And joining us from our Washington, D.C. studio is Allan Topol, author of The Russian Endgame and a Huffington Post blogger. We welcome all of you to the show and thank you for joining us. We're going to start things off with a quote from Mikhail Gorbachev, of course, the former leader of the Soviet Union. He says Ukraine is a wake-up call for the Western world, and now Ukraine is everybody's problem. Dr. Mckoy, I know this, these protests started back in November. If you can kind of just give us a run-through as to how this all started and where we're going.
Well, really, these specific set of protests began over the current president's refusal to sign treaties that would lead to a growing union with the European Union, under pressure from Russian President Vladimir Putin.
Who also bailed them out, gave them $15 billion.
Although this essential, what many in the West consider to be a bribe, happened after the beginning of this protest, hopefully as a palliative to draw attention away from the protest, or to at least get the protesters to see, oh look, a closer relationship with Russia and not with the EU is better than having these drawn ties with the EU, and it very much didn't work. In fact, it seemed to have an even more inflammatory effect to demonstrate that Putin expects to have much more influence in the Ukraine. And
I want to check in with our Washington, D.C. guest, Allan. And Allan, if you can just talk to us about why these demonstrations are continuing so much, and they're very violent right now.
Well, yes, Mia. When I wrote a piece for the Huffington Post on this topic, drew the parallel between what's happening now in the Ukraine with what happened in Hungary in 1956. And I think that parallel makes sense because I think Putin and the Russians are really very anxious, even desperate, to keep Ukraine within their sphere of influence. And the protesters' desire is to pull away from Russia, to look west toward the Western Europeans. And that's what the struggle is all about. Putin trying to recreate his empire and not willing to let the Ukraine go. And so think Hungary in 1956. this will not end well for the protesters.
And of course, Ukraine is an interesting country. 45 million, of course, half look to the west, to Europe, and half look to Russia. So it's a very strategic country, I guess you could say.
It is strategic, and right now with Putin trying to rebuild his old Russian Soviet empire, it's a critical time for him, and he doesn't want to lose Ukraine. And the people in the western part of Ukraine, they definitely want to hook up with the West. Now, he may have control of the people in the east, but it's going to be a very, very difficult situation, and I don't see it ending peacefully. I see the violence escalating over the next several weeks, unfortunately.
Well, Allan, we're going to get back to you in just a bit. I want to also ask Dee Dee and Jackie. Of course, we also have the Olympics coming up. What are your concerns? I mean, are you fearful that this could spill over into Russia?
Oh, huge concerns, because it's right there on the border. I mean, it's so strange that the Olympic Committee agreed to this, because with all the problems and a long history of problems, I mean, it's quite frankly dangerous. A lot of our athletes are telling their parents and family, don't come, because we want you to be safe. I mean, how terrible is that? When we've got all this strife in the world, and you want the Olympics to be something that brings everyone together, and it seems like it's doing just the opposite, unfortunately. Scary.
And they actually issued an alert to anybody traveling overseas. They were talking to some of the Olympic athletes who said that they are going to take it the buddy system, and that's just frightening. Jackie, your thoughts?
Yeah, it would be terrible to see something happen like what happened in Munich in 1972 or Atlanta in 1996. You know, and I think Dee Dee's right. Everybody's kind of on edge of what's going to happen, although the security is extremely tight and they're handling that well. You know, I'm a little afraid for the people of Poland. They're worried right now that this is going to spill into their territory.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, too. Now, hundreds of activists have already occupied City Hall, the Agricultural Ministry, as well as the Energy Ministry building. What does Yanukovych have to do for people to trust him now? Dr. Mckoy, you want to take that one?
I don't know. That's a really great question, and I don't think he's come up with a good answer, because really what he needs to do, I think the big signal he needs to send would be to reject the funds from Putin and really make a clear break with the Putin regime. But that
he's not going to do
it. No, he's not going to do it.
And that's
going
to invite an even worse backlash. So I really think he is stuck between a rock and a hard place, and it's difficult to imagine this not ending with violence, without actually a much firmer crackdown on these protesters, because as the clip was saying, mobilization has gotten stronger, not weaker. They've even tried firing hoses at the protesters, which you actually can see icicles forming because they fire water and it freezes almost immediately, and yet this has not deterred the protests. So it's really hard to see how he's going to be able to restore the situation.
I want to talk about Gorbachev's message as well, that this is a wake-up call for the world. Ukraine is now everybody's problem. Anybody want to talk about that?
You know, I thought that was an interesting message, because, you know, look, this isn't just talking about Hungary. This is a French Revolution. These people are angry, and they're not going to stop. They're not going to stop in anything. So I agree with the doctor here. I don't think this is going to end well. I don't see how it does, because he is absolutely committed to Putin, and the people do not want Putin. They do not want USSR #2. So that's what's going on here. So it just doesn't seem like it's going to end well at all.
Well, the only way they can do it is to crush those people. We don't want to see that happen.
Absolutely not. Let's weigh in with Allan again over in Washington, D.C. Allan, I asked the panel here, what does Yanukovych need to do for people to trust him?
I don't think they will, because on the basic issue, they realize, at least many of the residents of Ukraine realize, that Yanukovych is going to tie them to Putin. And they don't want that. So there's no way that they can ever trust him. And therein lies the basic problem. And Putin only plays to win. Gee, I did so much research on his history and biography in connection with the Russian endgame, his whole background as a KGB thug. And Putin always plays to win. He will take whatever it takes to put these terrorists, that he calls them, the protesters in Ukraine, down, just as he will try to do whatever he can to the Islamics to protect the Olympics. But he has practically an insurmountable problem there, because the area around Sochi is a huge area, and it's really questionable whether he can totally safeguard that area.
Interesting points there. Thank you, Allan. We also want to go over to Syria, where we are seeing a glimmer, I guess you might say, a small glimmer of hopes. That both sides actually went to Geneva II. There's talks that they went 5 hours after each other to avoid one another, but yet they did sit down. So we will talk about that glimmer of hope, but still, so disturbing. Three years, 130,000 people.
130,000.
That's what we
estimate.
think.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the estimate.
And
but
not counting displaced or long-term psychological damage. I mean, this has been horrific.
Oh,
right.
absolutely. In terms of Syria, are you hopeful after hearing this last? I mean, it's been going on for 3 years.
I'll say I'm hopeful, but not optimistic. I mean, once these talks started and they said Iran's not there, I think any hopes that anything, there are two things I heard. One, Iran is not there. And two, the opposition and the U.S. is saying we won't accept any agreement where Assad stays in power. Given those two conditions, I can't imagine how this can actually be a fruitful resolution for now. But it is better, but it's always better to have people talking than not talking. So it's, but anything hopeful coming out now, unlikely.
Jackie, jump in there.
Let me be a little ray of sunshine on this. Yeah, nobody's talking to each other. You've got Assad who's calling the other side terrorists. You've got that other side who's looking at Assad and saying that you have used chemical weapons on your own people. Now, Kerry came in and said that they are planning the whole Geneva II on the Geneva Communique, which was an agreement made last year that would institute an interim government and have a little bit of the Assad side in there with a little bit of the protesters. So both sides would be running the government for a little bit of time and they would work it out. That's what this entire thing is based on. And I'm not saying that it's going to work. It looks bad, but I'm saying it's a heck of a lot better than all the bloodshed that's going on now.
Well, at least it's a first step.
It's something.
It's
Yeah.
something.
And I guess. I mean, I don't think it's going to go anywhere. I think it was just empty talk and all talk, no action. And it's they can try all they want, but if nothing's going to happen, I mean, what's the action?
But you can't take that attitude.
We talked about the 3 years there, and now if we also turn to the 3 years in Egypt. Of course, this week marks the 3rd-year anniversary of the uprising over in Egypt, and such deadly violence over there as well. Dee Dee, you want to take a...
Yeah, I just think it's a bad omen of what's coming up with Ukraine, because you've got the same situation, but I think 10 times worse. These people are intense, they're angry. This is a country for 42,000 years. They've been occupied. They're over it. They're sick of it. They're sick of this history. They want Putin nowhere to be there. Our friend in Washington is exactly right about his read on Putin.
Well, there's just so much unrest in so many parts of the country right now. Allan in Washington, D.C., if you can just give us your final thoughts. In terms of the unrest, are you more worried about the Ukraine or Egypt?
No, actually, among the three of them, in some ways, Syria is the worst problem among the three of them, because I think in the Syrian problem is Assad will never go. The Russians and Iranians will never let him relinquish any share of his power. I think it's just a sham that they're going through, unfortunately, in Geneva, and I don't see them having any progress. And the reason I say it's a worse problem in some ways because the spillover is devastating for the rest of the Middle East. It's devastating for Lebanon. It's totally making Jordan and Turkey are in a very, very difficult situation. And if I'm right and nothing happens, and I think Dee Dee said the same thing, nothing positive is going to come out of this Geneva II conference, then it means this unrest that's stimulated by Syria is unfortunately going to continue.
We thank you for your insights, and don't go away. President Obama has ordered new limits to U.S. spying. What's it all mean? We'll break it down when Fresh Outlook returns.